Well, hi everyone, and greetings from Northern Michigan. This is Bob the Science Guy, and as promised, today I'm going to start my series on the Disinformation Dozen. These are pandemic profiteers that are taking advantage of the anti-vax movement, putting out an estimated 65 to 70% of all anti-vax propaganda on social media. Now, to help me with this, I have Dr. Daniel Wilson with me. He is a molecular biologist from the East Coast. And since most of my critics like to criticize my lack of hair, I brought him on to bring balance into the universe again. So Dr. Wilson, welcome to Bob the Science Guy and ResearchFlatMoon. I'm very glad to hear you. I'm a great admirer of your work. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hey Bob, happy to be here. Likewise, I'm a big fan of your channel too. Just checking it out last night. Um, yeah, I'm a molecular biologist. I got my PhD studying molecular biology at Carnegie Mellon University. So as a molecular biologist, I study a lot of protein-protein interactions. I study how proteins interact with DNA. I study how DNA and mRNA work, and ultimately how all these molecules work to make cells function and keep you alive. So in my spare time, though, I run my YouTube channel, which is just a passion project of mine, Debunk the Funk, where I focus on debunking anti-vaccine disinformation. And it's been I've been doing that for the past about 3 years, and it's been real fun.
So if I wanted to know, for example, whether or not the COVID-19 vaccine, the mRNA vaccine, changed my DNA, you would literally be the expert to ask on that.
Oh yeah, molecular biologists would be able to answer that question pretty easily. And the
Okay,
answer is no.
and the answer is no. Okay.
The answer is
Well,
no.
one of the reasons that I wanted to bring you on today was it's been a long time since medical school for me. I don't think I could write out the Krebs cycle if my life depended on it, because I don't use it in clinical medicine. But I've got nearly 40 years of experience doing clinical medicine, and I wanted to bring you in to help me out with some of the basic raw science of the anti-vax claims and how vaccines work, etc. So what do you say we get going with our first group from the Disinformation Dozen, the 12 people that are responsible for up to 70% of anti-vax propaganda on social media? Who do you want to go to first?
Let's get right into it. Yeah, let's start with the couple, Ty and Charlene Bollinger.
Oh, they're an interesting group, aren't they? Ty and Charlene Bollinger have a long history of promoting disinformation on cancer, and they have switched gears over to vaccine disinformation. As a bit of background information, they have approximately 1.5 million followers on social media, bringing in more than $3 million a year in revenue. Now, during COVID, they have received from the federal government almost $475,000 in pandemic payroll protection, while actively promoting misinformation and disinformation about vaccines. Now, like most of the other anti-vax disinformation dozen, they employ a marketing strategy that involves sharing leads to people that are receptive to anti-vax propaganda. And they pay for these leads. And as you can tell, many of the people that are in their overall sales leaderboard are other members of the vaccine disinformation dozen. For example, number one is Sayer G. Then you have Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Michael Adams, Dr. Sherry Tenpenny. These are all obtaining payments for referral of leads to the Bollingers. But let's get back to our discussion with Dr. Wilson. Now, Ty and Charlene would you describe them as kind of like alternative medicine proponents?
Yeah, grifters is how I'd describe them.
I'm
Um,
trying to be kind. I truly am.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's hard to give much leeway to people like them though, who have literally built their fortune, and it is a fortune that they've made on selling disinformation products to vulnerable people.
Well, the problem that you run into is when you receive a diagnosis of cancer, a lot of people view that as a death sentence, and desperation sets in quite quickly. I've seen this many times in my career. You know, some cancers actually are curable. Testicular cancer, for example, is
Hmm.
pretty relatively curable. Childhood cancers, of course, are getting much better. But when
Hmm.
people hear that C word, they just go into panic mode. And sometimes, if they don't have a good relationship with their physician or their medical team, they tend to look to alternative treatments that promise the world and the sky for a price.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there are people out there that take advantage of this, similar to the patent medicine practitioners of the 19th century. This particular couple put out a book, I believe it was, called The Truth About Cancer,
Mm-hmm.
and were quite successful. And they sold cures and supplements and essential oils and promoted vitamins in the treatment of cancer.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't have any problems with having good nutrition when you have a diagnosis of cancer, but this isn't just nutritional advice, is it?
No, it's not. They're giving advice that, if it was in a proper context, wouldn't be bad advice, of course. Get your proper nutrition, maybe do some things that make you personally feel healthy if you get that cancer diagnosis. But selling it as this is a cure and the medicine that your doctor is going to give you is poison and bad, that's also included in their message, and that is just not okay.
Well, they were quite successful with The Truth About Cancer, weren't they? They made quite a bit of money from it, and they sold very expensive supplements.
Mm-hmm.
Using that business model and the COVID-19 pandemic, I think that what they did was they decided, well, that worked for cancer, and they came out with something called The Truth About Vaccines, which basically is a cookie cutter of the original model of The Truth About Cancer. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, pretty much. They kind of take this approach. It's an odd approach that they say that COVID is causing a fake pandemic, but instead of acknowledging the danger of the virus, they demonize vaccines. And they're more so selling false information than they are selling supplements and products in this context. So yeah, it is a cookie cutter in the sense that their book and their movie about cancer did really well, so they're trying to do a similar thing with COVID.
Now, a lot of my research came from an organization that does work with hate speech on the internet. It's called the Center for Countering Digital Hate. And they do anti-Semitic hate, they do anti-women hate, anti-Muslim hate. And one of the things that they also talk about is vaccine disinformation as a hate. And what they do is they're a non-governmental organization. They're supported specifically by philanthropical organizations and public donations. And they send researchers all over the world and digital experts that can track digital media back to the source and things like that. Now, they infiltrated a meeting in December of 2020. And I'm going to go ahead and show what was going on with COVID in December of 2020. And as COVID was raging throughout the world, 5 of these disinformation dozens came together and came up with what's called the AntiVax Playbook.
Mm-hmm.
And the 3 main components that they wanted to hit was they wanted to counter the message from mainstream medicine that COVID was dangerous, vaccines are safe, and widespread immunization was a good public health policy. And they countered that by saying that COVID is very minor. It's basically the COVID cold. That vaccines are horrendous and deadly, and that natural herd immunity was the best approach to COVID. You remember that? Mm-hmm. And that's a common theme in a lot of these memes. And they try and hit those, one or more of those on every meme that they put out. Now, they do some variations, and I think that's what our friends here are doing. And that is, instead of just concentrating on herd immunity and natural immunity, they like to interject alternative medicine, which conveniently they sell. So, sure. Dr. Wilson, you've reviewed some of these things with me on this couple as well. What are some of the things that they're promoting as a counter for COVID that they happen to sell?
Yeah, so one of the things that they generally promote on their website are vitamins and essential oils. Um, these two things seem to be staples in the wellness disinformation communities, such as the ones that Ty and Charlene Bollinger have built. And it's resting on this fallacy, or rather taking advantage of this naturalist approach to illness, where people feel good about using things that feel natural, like vitamins and essential oils, and they can sell them to people because those aren't really regulated by the FDA. So they can sell them and call them treatments and then have disclaimers that nobody reads. And people will think that they're being protected against a virus or cancer by having these things that are natural and may feel good to use. But really, biologically, there's no mechanism by which vitamins are going to help combat a virus. Obviously, if you are deficient in your nutrients, then your immune system is going to not be able to fight the virus as well. But most people who would be buying this stuff are not suffering malnutrition. And same with essential oils. There's just no mechanism by which they can combat viruses or cancer.
Well, there's a lot of substances out there that have quote-unquote anti-cancer properties. Yeah. I think if you put a cancer cell in a sufficient quantity of distilled water, you will eventually rupture the cancer cell by the process of osmosis. Can we use claims that, this is an anti-cancer agent in a petri dish, and can we translate that to actual human use? For example, there's a condition called hyponatremia. The symptoms of hyponatremia, of course, are seizures and death.
Yeah.
So technically, although distilled water can kill cancer cells due to a process of osmosis, to get enough water into your body to do that would kill you from hyponatremia and water intoxication.
Yeah.
Simply because an agent is claimed to have some anti-cancer properties in the lab does not necessarily translate into clinical use, does it?
No, not at all. And I think what people who Ty and Charlene Bollinger prey on, that I think the issue is they don't really understand core concepts in how we study anti-cancer medicine or how cancer really works. You're right. If we put cancer in a dish, there are lots of things that can kill it. I'm sure people who pay attention to even remotely scientific headlines over decades will see headlines about a lot of compounds that scientists are studying to kill cancer cells in a dish, because it's pretty easy to get cancer cells to die in a dish with a specific compound. But then it's really hard to translate that into an actual medicine that's going to efficiently kill the cancer cells in your body without affecting healthy cells in a way that is detrimental to your health beyond the benefits that it might cause.
That makes sense.
So yeah, it's really, there are lots of, you can find in the scientific literature lots of products that have some efficacy against cancer growth in a dish, but usually a lot of those products will fail at animal testing because it just turns out that the way that your body metabolizes it, or the amount needed to give to an animal or a human, just makes it so that it doesn't work well against cancer. Ty and Charlene Bollinger might throw up studies that say, oh, this essential oil had some anti-cancer property. But people don't realize, because often science papers are written for scientists and not the general public, that there are big limitations in whatever study they propose. But it makes them look credible. So they do it, and people unfortunately believe them.
Can you just take a moment and talk about cancer and then address their approach to it from the science aspect?
Yeah, sure. So I think when it comes to Ty and Charlene Bollinger's approach to both cancer and COVID and vaccines, it's just overall overly simplistic and blatantly ignores science. A lot of people that might be their customers probably don't understand that cancer is not a result of you just being unhealthy that can be corrected by being healthy. Cancer is an accumulation of mutations in your DNA uh, over time. And so over longer periods of time, you get more and more mutations building up. And eventually those mutations break down the processes that your cells have to function correctly. And that is essentially what causes cancer. And things like vitamins and essential oils are not going to correct those mutations or get rid of the cancer cells. You have to somehow target the cancer cells specifically or be able to take them out of the body. And depending on the cancer, that's really hard to do. You're not going to accomplish that with things like essential oils and vitamins. Similarly, with a virus like COVID, you're not going to be able to stop SARS-CoV-2 with vitamins and essential oils. You have to either train your immune system to specifically recognize it with a vaccine, or you have to target specific parts of the virus with an antiviral. And neither of those things are supported by Ty and Charlene Bollinger. They instead promote fake treatments that don't work at a very high price.
Which they are happy to collect.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right.
They make their living off of selling things that don't work.
Well, the third characteristic of science denial by Dr. Lee McIntyre is the promotion of fake experts over real experts.
Oh yeah.
And Ty and Charlene are definitely fake experts, and they deride actual experts.
Mm-hmm.
They deride public health recommendations. You know, bears are natural. However, even though bears are natural, I kind of like man-made glass between me and them. I'm not going to go up and pet a bear cub in front of its mother,
No.
even though they're both natural things. That's not simply because something's natural. I'm natural, they're natural. That doesn't mean that that's really the best course of action all the time. The body is a remarkable in maintaining homeostasis. It wants to live, and it does a lot of things that allow it to live. An immune system, for example, which attacks viruses but doesn't necessarily kill us, although it can, and it can make us quite sick. A lot of medicine is not curative. What it does is it augments the response of the body to a condition, or it weakens something so that the body can actually hit it. Neither of these are being promoted by these two individuals. That's what antiviral medicine does. That's what antibiotics does. It damages cell walls and viruses. It's got very specific functions. Nutrition is great, but I don't think that nutrition is the answer to something that has successfully invaded your body like a virus.
Right.
And even though herd immunity is good and natural immunity is good, one of the problems that you run into when you rely strictly on that is that a lot of people die. The history of pandemics show that they generally come in waves, and a lot of people get sick when the pandemic first comes in because we don't have immunity to it.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of those people get sick enough to be in the hospital and die. We have limited resources to care for people. And by using vaccinations to blunt this curve, we avoid overwhelming our healthcare system. That's something that Ty and Charlene are directly working against.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the objection that I have with them from a public health standpoint. So.
Right. Yeah. And just to add to that, their approach of herd immunity is the answer. Just let everybody get infected. We don't need to have all these safeguards and measures to prevent and reduce harm. just let everyone get infected and natural immunity will take over. That approach has never worked for any infectious disease throughout history. Even just take measles, for example.
Well, how about chickenpox parties?
Oh, sure, yeah,
Yeah,
chickenpox parties.
yeah.
I mean, sure, you get infected young as a kid and you will have immunity for life, but a large fraction of those kids who get chickenpox will get very sick, and some may suffer severe disease or even die.
Brain damage,
Hmm.
varicella meningitis is a thing.
Hmm. Yeah.
But deliberately exposing somebody to a dangerous condition is
Hmm.
not, the damage that can be caused by the condition is far greater than any potential damage caused by a vaccine.
Right.
If you look
Yeah,
at
you
the
can.
vaccine, if you look at the vaccine injury fund, the interesting thing about that is that if you actually look at the cases, out of every 5 cases, 4 of them are related to injuries from the needle itself.
Oh yeah. Hmm.
Only 1 out of 5 is related to the vaccine. And
Right.
the incidence of any injury with any vaccine, including COVID, is about 1 in 1 million cases, or 1 in 1 million doses.
Hmm.
If you didn't dose those people with the vaccine, you look at the natural history of the disease and see how many of those million people would get the disease. It's a significant
Hmm.
number for something
Yep.
like measles, which is extraordinarily contagious.
Right.
And the morbidity and mortality from measles is much higher than 1 in 1 million.
Right.
So it's literally the lesser of two evils.
It is. Yeah. And the other problem with taking a natural immunity approach is not only are you just going to have one wave where measles spreads through the vulnerable, the immunologically naive people who haven't been infected with measles before, and then have a wave of illness and death. But a few years after that, when a new generation of people who have never seen measles come along, then you have another wave. And those waves of suffering just continue and continue and continue indefinitely with this natural immunity approach. But with vaccination, all those immunologically naive people, their immune systems get trained naturally from a vaccine, which lets them see those antigens from the virus. Their immune system knows how to recognize it and stop it before it can cause severe disease, and you prevent all that suffering.
Well, my children don't have smallpox vaccination scars.
Hmm.
And the reason that they don't have those and don't have smallpox in their society is that I have a scar.
Hmm.
You may have a scar. We did our part and ended that disease for mankind.
Hmm.
And
Yep.
we did it through vaccines in the mid 60s. So, well, thank you very much for stopping by.
My pleasure.
And we'll go ahead and continue this. We'll continue this. Okay?
Sounds great, Bob.